So if you're watching this video right now because you're dealing with a counterproductive, toxic leader, I encourage you to go back and look at the first video I did where it lays out what the Army at least says in regards to counterproductive is what they use now, toxic leadership. In this video, we're going to look at 4 things that you can do. If you're dealing with a toxic / counterproductive leader. The first thing that you can do, the first thing you should do is genuinely, sincerely ask yourself this question: am I truly dealing with a toxic leader? ADP 6-22-847 says all leaders, George Washington, General Patton, Abraham Lincoln, all leaders are susceptible to displaying counterproductive leadership behaviors in times of stress, high up tempo, or other chaotic conditions. It goes on to say in the next paragraph, 848, that Army leaders can and will make mistakes. And so distinguishing between occasional errors of judgment and counterproductive behavior is important. Seriously ask yourself, is this a one-off? Is this a high-stress situation? Is this a I got in trouble so I'm upset situation? Or am I genuinely dealing with a counterproductive leader? I have to tell you that many people have come to me and complained or, wanted to talk about their toxic, counterproductive leader. And I've heard the story and I've been inflamed and I've been upset in hearing their side of the story. But then I kind of dug in a little bit and did a little underground investigation, and I found that, there's another side of the story. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 17, so important if you're a leader, so important if somebody's coming to you and wanting to talk about counterproductive leadership. Proverbs 18:17 says, he who speaks first sounds right until the next one comes and presents its case. Because so often I've seen the other side of the story and I've been like, maybe this isn't counterproductive leadership. So the first thing, before we go any further, you genuinely need to have a conversation with somebody else or yourself and determine in your heart, am I upset? And, am I a little sore, sensitive, salty, or am I genuinely dealing with a counterproductive leader? Number 2 is make the sincere effort to understand your boss. Oh, I know you might be upset. Oh, I know you might be frustrated. Oh, I know your blood might be boiling. But really, if you're dealing with a counterproductive / toxic leader, you need, before you move on to any kind of action, you need to make the effort to understand your boss. And if you do that, it might help you answer question 1, am I genuinely dealing with a toxic leader? Did a lot of research for this message, and one of the articles that I read was this, practical lessons learned for dealing with toxic leaders and bad bosses. And sum it up in one point was this article was all about you need to understand your boss. Hard to see when your eyes are red, but you need to ask yourself the questions. What pressures are my boss feeling? What are he or she, what pressure are they getting from above or maybe laterally or even from the bottom? What are my boss's strengths and weaknesses, and how does my issue relate to their strengths and weaknesses? Is it a vulnerability for them that I'm kind of, pushing on because they're a little more sensitive? Try to understand where your boss is coming from. Have you considered what your boss's leadership philosophy is, what their values are, the words that are important to them? And can you have a discussion based upon that? Make an effort to understand those things. And also, there's an old adage, it's one of my kind of core values, is the fact that hurt people hurt people. Think about that for a second. Hurt people hurt people. What does that mean? And what does that mean in relationship to your toxic / counterproductive leader? Hurt people hurt people. It might help create a little context of why you're going through what you're going through. And remember that as much as they might appear to be a monster, your boss is still a human being. So number 1 is seriously ask yourself the question, am I dealing with a counterproductive leader? Number 2 is seek to understand your boss, your leader. Number 3 is build a support network, because you're going to be hurting, and as much as your leader is sucking life out of you, you need somebody to breathe it right back into you. So who do you talk to? Who do you process and plan? How can I best deal with this? Sometimes in talking with somebody, we kind of discover the truth ourselves. How do you verbalize and vent? Who are you doing that to? A lot of times people go to the chaplain because of the confidentiality issue. They can vent and they know that it's going to stay in the chaplain's office. And so a lot of people have talked to me about issue like this. I recommend also going to a previous old leader. I have talked to frustrated people and they have said, I talked to my old sergeant major who's out of the picture, my old first sergeant who's out of the picture. Great choice when they do that, because you're going to get a little perspective. Hopefully you're going to get a little, kind of unfiltered perspective. You know what I mean? Somebody who's just not going to tell you what you want to hear. But so you need to build your support network because you're going to be going through a hard time and you need people to support you through that. To be working under a toxic leader all by your lonesome with no support is a very, very lonely journey. So that's number 3. Finally, number 4. Number 1 was, what was it? Ask yourself, hey, am I really dealing with a toxic leader? Number 2 is try to understand your boss. Number 3 is build a support network. And now, of course, number 4 is carefully consider your options. What options do you have in dealing with a toxic leader? So with no judgment, I just want to go through a couple of them right now. All have risks, all have potential for negative consequences. Some of these options consume copious amounts of emotional energy. In other words, it's going to take a lot of strength for you to act on this option. So option number 1 is to wait it out. Wait till they leave, wait till you leave. And this is a preferred option for many in the Army because we PCS, so often that it might not be a long time before your boss or you PCS. So I'm just going to get the bunker mentality, kind of stay out of, firing range of my boss and see if I can just hold my breath until we leave. And so in that way you don't have to deal, with direct confrontation. And that's a plus. And you can kind of work to minimize your exposure, try to, where they're at, go on the other side of the building. But if you choose this option of kind of waiting it out, number 1, you're passing the pain to somebody else. Somebody's going to follow you and they're going to deal with that pain, and who knows how many generations of people will suffer because nobody has stepped up. You're still going to endure the daily suffering of working under a toxic leader. Nothing is going to change. You're likely to become an empty complainer. You know what an empty complainer is? Somebody who just bitches and moans and moans and moans but never does anything about it. And they often say it's election season now. Hey, listen, if you're going to moan and groan about the government and you don't vote, then you don't have a right to complain. So listen, you can complain all you want, but what are you going to do about it? Don't become an empty complainer. And then also, did you know it violates Army doctrine? This choice to wait it out violates Army doctrine. ADP 6-22, great reading. 8-50 says all Army members who witness counterproductive behaviors have a responsibility to prevent, intervene, counter or mitigate them. Soldiers and DA civilians must be willing to confront and address these behaviors and should leverage their chains of command to assist and involve relevant installation resources where and when necessary. So really the bunker mentality kind of violates the spirit of Army doctrine. But it is a viable option, and it is probably the most popular option given my from my foxhole. Number 2 is to directly engage your boss. Kind of the man-to-man conversation. Not confront your boss. That's kind of an aggressive word. Let's use the word engage them. And this kind of embodies the Army value, though kind of an unofficial Army value, of solving a problem at the lowest level possible, and it demonstrates moral courage, and I think it would give you the personal validation, say, hey, I did the best that I could. But you also, when you do this, you walk into a minefield. of so many potential ways this conversation could derail and go dramatically and drastically wrong. There are so many potential pitfalls in dealing with a conflict man-to-man, face-to-face like this, and I strongly encourage you. I have 2 videos that talk about the rules of engagement in dealing with conflict. They would be very, very helpful should you choose to go down this road. Things to remember in dealing with a one-on-one engagement kind of like this. So please look at those videos in dealing with conflict 1 and 2. This meeting is going to consume a ton of emotional energy, and it will be very, very stressful, and it will be very hard for the recipient, your boss, not to feel directly attacked by this. Because, in the previous video, we talked about counterproductive behaviors that, the Army identifies, and a counterproductive behavior, they said, is one of 5 behaviors: an abusive behavior, self-serving behavior, an erratic behavior, a leadership incompetence, or corrupt behavior. So if you're going to talk with your boss and you're going to, say you're screamer, schemer, psycho, submerged, incompetent, or scumbag, it's going to be hard for them to kind of just not take that personally. So really, you need to be very, very careful. But the plus side for this is you are solving it at the lowest level possible. So number 1, bunker mentality, wait it out, hold your breath. Number 2, directly engage your boss. Again, ton of potential pitfalls. It's walking through a minefield. Number 3 is to engage your boss's boss. Use the open door policy. The commander's commander, if you will. But know that if you do this, the first question that the commander's commander might ask you is, have you tried to solve this at the lowest possible place? Have you had the conversation with your boss? They're going to ask you that. Now, you might say, well, I'm not comfortable. I don't feel safe. I think that's a great answer. And this might be an opportunity to get quicker results because, your boss's boss, let me say it again, pay attention here. Your boss's boss is your boss's kryptonite, okay? A toxic leader's kryptonite is their raider, is the one who's going to give them or not give them the top block. So if you want to kind of get to their vulnerable belly side, then you talk to their commander. But in doing so, you are absolutely losing control because you don't know how that person, that commander, is going to respond. You don't know what the actions are going to be. So you lose a little bit of control in doing it. It also involves a huge amount of emotional energy to walk into that commander's room and tell them what's going on. But I will say, going back to ADP 6-22, 8-50, commanders, and this is a quote, commanders and leaders have a responsibility to monitor and take action to eliminate counterproductive leadership. So your commander's commander has an Army doctrine responsibility to weed out, identify, and eliminate counterproductive leadership. But again, it's a very, very tricky situation where you lose control because you don't really know how they're going to respond. Another thing is to consider is this: before you go and to practice the open door policy, you need to really know that you might be dramatically negatively affecting a person's career. Because if you go to a commander and you say so-and-so is a toxic leader, that might have a real damaging effect on their career. So it goes back to question number 1. You really need to ask yourself, am I dealing with a toxic leader? I have had leaders, investigated because people accuse them of different things, and it takes a stress on the toll on the family, on themselves, and it's a very, very dark and difficult time for them. So you need to be very sure in your heart that you're dealing with a toxic leader. I cannot emphasize that enough. And fine, so you can use the bunker mentality. You can have that direct engagement, that direct discussion with the toxic/counterproductive leader. You can go to their boss, practice the open door policy. And finally, a fourth option is to leverage the Army resources. Again, it goes back to that doctrinal statement that says that your responsibility is to deal with this and in paragraph 8-50, involve relevant installation resources where and when necessary. So for example, your EO, your unit EO, IG, sharp if it's relevant there. Command climate surveys. I can tell you from just observational anecdotal evidence, commanders jump when they read a salty command climate survey. That stuff matters to them. So you can utilize these things as well. The advantage of that is you get a little more control, a little more confidentiality. You're protected a little bit because you're kind of, one step removed from the situation. You're just shining a light on it. So, but you understand it takes a little longer time, for this process to unfold, and you better have good evidence to back up your claim. So these are the four things, your four options, if you will. If you are dealing with a counterproductive leader, you can take the bunker mentality. A lot of people do that. You can engage your boss. Again, that's a real delicate situation. Practice the open door policy. You lose a little control in that, but you might get a quicker result. Or you can leverage Army resources, and the advantage in that is you're one step removed from the situation, a little more control, little more confidentiality. If you do think you're dealing with a toxic leader, you really need to ask yourself the question, am I really dealing with this one, a toxic leader, or am I a little kind of taking a consequence a little personally, a little salty? Number two, I need to have you really tried to understand where your boss is coming from, or are you just seeing red that you can't see anything but frustration and anger? Number three is what's number three? Number three is build your support network. Who's helping you process and plan this? And then finally, number four, consider your options. I really hope this helps you in dealing what can be one of the most tremendously stressful situations that we find ourselves in. Finally, one last thing. If you want to deal with toxic / counterproductive leaders in the Army, then point out the good ones. Point out the good. Shine a light on the good, and that will, I think, expose the dark. So that being said, God bless you. Walk in peace, and as always, have the best day possible.